Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Improving Compliance Rate Changes webinar. This one is part of the Mastering Blueforce the Weekly series. Obviously, this webinar is for the week of February the 13th. Now, as we get started for our webinar today, we do mute every attendee. So currently, everyone is muted, so if there's any questions or any concerns that come up during our call today, please do me a favor and enter the question in the questions area of the control panel. As shown here on the screenshot there, probably on the right-hand side of your screen. Go ahead and enter your question there and hit send, and we'll see that and answer it at the appropriate time in our conversations. Now, just a reminder for everybody, as everyone has done a very good job of attending our webinars thus far, all of our webinars as part of this Mastering Blueforce series are going to be conducted ongoing on Tuesdays and Thursdays until further notice, every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. And we're doing these to make sure that everybody in the field has the critical tools and basically the knowledge needed to actually go ahead and master the Blueforce system. So all webinars, so after today's webinar, I will post this webinar that is being recorded. I will post it on our YouTube site that we have out there, as well as on our Gateway site, as well as the documentation, which most of the time is the slides or any other documentation that may accompany the webinar will also be posted out there on the Gateway site, as well as other site called Google Drive, in which you can go ahead and download the documents or review them as needed. Now, for today's webinar, we will be covering the topic of rate change. Specifically, what is rate change? What does that mean? And then going to go through who are our top 10 leaders as far as our different companies are concerned within ISS, North America. And then lastly, we'll go through and discuss how to stop making those rate changes, and why are they happening, and give you a solution on how to stop those. So let's get started on the fifth metric of our compliance, which is rate change. Now, over the last 4 weeks, we've actually gone through the other 4 metrics. We started with invalid punch. We then ventured into the discussion of manual punches, looked at time changes, and we also looked at correction lag last week. And this is the fifth metric of the compliance component. So let's go in here and define what is rate change. So for everyone's benefit here, rate change can be best described as any manual alteration of an employee's pay rate in Blueforce. So it basically means that someone has gone in there and changed the pay rate that's coming across in Blueforce. Now, first off, there should be no rate changes being done directly in the employee's timesheet in Blueforce. There's other alternatives that I'll get through in our call today, but no rate changes should be occurring in Blueforce. And once again, rate change is actually the easiest metric to hit a 4.0, and I'll prove that here in a little bit, showing you the top 10 list. There really is no reason why all of us on this phone call cannot get a 4.0 perfect score on rate change. Now, one thing I keep in mind about rate change, and I kind of mentioned that it's best described as any manual alteration to an employee's pay rate. The question always comes up here is, I don't even see the pay rate. Why is there change being done then if I can't even see the pay rate? Well, to that point, only those that have access to seeing the pay rate field in Blueforce actually can make the changes to it. That being said, only those on this phone call that are the submitters with pay rate role or an approver with pay rate role actually can go in there and edit that particular field. What that basically means is if you can't see it either, you can't see anyone's rate on the employee profile, you can't see any rates on any reports, you can't see rates anywhere in Blueforce except these 2 roles. So if we have any changes occurring at your locations, the individuals that hold these 2 roles are the ones making those changes. Now, JDE is always a system of record here, so keep in mind that all permanent and basically your primary pay rate have to actually reside in JD Edwards. So that also requires that someone with JDE access actually go in there and control that pay rate change. And that's why I mentioned here we want to always contact your local payroll admin for assistance. And in some cases, you may deal directly with someone at corporate payroll, but more times than not, it'll be someone that's closely related to you in a payroll capacity to your site. So rate changes are critical in that we want the system, once again, to control the rates for you. We don't want it to be going in there and editing any rates. We don't want to go in there and make any changes that are unneeded. We want the system to control this. So to that, we do understand that there's always going to be an instance, there's always going to be instances somewhere that an employee may work two different tasks, meaning that they may be a custodian today, or this afternoon they may go and be a porter role there, or they may go somewhere else and be a carpet tech or a window washer. So we understand that the employees work different tasks. We also understand that they may also work different job sites. And in those both scenarios might create a scenario where they get paid different rates. We understand that. We are very well aware that this is occurring across the company, but there's a proper way to address these, and I'll get to that here momentarily. We also understand that many employees may work at a job site that requires a certain pay rate or differential rate due to be paid when an employee works a certain rate type, task, shift, particular time of day, or particular day of the week. Now, these scenarios that I've mentioned here are simply temporary or conditional rates, and these can be set up in the system pretty quickly. They're easy to go set up for the most part. I mean, you'll have some interaction with the IT ePay team, which I'll explain in a little bit, but for the most part, they're easy to set up. Granted, you know the conditions and the scenarios that need to be set up. You know, anything that's related to that. Now, in saying that, once again, we do understand the employees work different, tasks and jobs, and they get paid different rates. If the system is set up with this information, the system will automatically apply the rate when you need it. It'll automatically calculate the pay rate against the hours so that we know the proper pay. It'll do all the work for you, and that is what the purpose of this call is, to kind of drive you that direction to do that the proper way. A specific job, task, or shift premium or differential rule can be set up within Blueforce, to which a system will automatically apply. Note here is assist and will not reduce your compliance score. So right at the pay rate, that is essentially going to affect your rate change score because you're changing a rate, and could potentially affect your correction lag score we talked about last week because you are making a change to the time record. How in the future, so how far the actual time record was created versus the time you actually would affect as well. So keep it, stay up, bottom line, 4.0 rate change. I can kind of segue over about 4.0s and see. I will say that I normally show the top 10 list here. However, today I can't show a top 10 list. I have to show a top 17 list. We have 17 companies or ISS areas that have a 4.0 in this metric. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no reason why everyone here cannot get a 4.0. So in numerical order by company number, we listed them here as being the 17 areas that have the best rate change score. So right now, these locations are perfect. They're not going in there and making any changes to rates. They're using the system to drive any of those rules, differentials, you name it, out of the system. So the system-driven is the way we want to go. So hats off to everyone here on this list. As always, I don't want to take away from other locations because there's a lot of districts within these locations listed here, more so other locations not listed on this 17 list that are doing fantastic. So let's address those right now. So of the 1,300 plus ISS districts, we have 249 districts that have a perfect 4.0 score and when it comes to rate changes. We have another 30 that have a perfect score, well, not a perfect score, but a score between 3.5 and 3.99, which is pretty good. However, I'm going to challenge those 30 districts plus those that are not part of the part of the 4.0 club per se, to go and get that 4.0, because once again, if 91% of our total locations are, or districts are in this case, are compliant, of which probably I think what I figured out is probably about 80, a little over 82% that actually are with 4.0, we can actually go through and stretch that a little bit more by making everyone a 4.0. It's not a difficult task to hit whatsoever. So those that have access to those rates, I'm going to go through some process or some options and ideas to making sure that we stop making rate changes in Blueforce and allow the system to drive those rate changes when needed. So once again, hats off to all those that were Perfect 4.0. So the first question, how do I stop making those rate changes? Well, it's very simple. There are two key ways of doing so. First one, the first bullet point there, it's task level rates. Now, a task level rate can be essentially a rate, a specific pay rate assigned to a specific task. What that means that is if you always have someone that's working as a carpet tech, for example, when they clock into job 1, 2, 3, and they go to work to job 1, 2, 3, they're going to actually pick the task to clock into as a carpet tech. Well, in the background, we're going to have I guess you can say, a hard-coded rate to that particular task. So that being said, whenever someone clocks into that task or their time is edited to that task, it automatically assigns the proper rate for that employee. That's a task level rate. Now, these rates are always applied to those employees only working that task. So therefore, if an employee normally gets paid, let's say for sake of math here, $10 an hour, but they work this carpet tech rate that pays $15 an hour, if they are not clocking into that task or their time record does not show that they are at that task, they'll still be paid their $10 rate. That $10 rate is still going to be in effect. It's only when they actually work that specific task that has that task level rate assigned to it. Now, employees' default tasks for a job can be controlled on the employee's default shift and task tab. What that essentially means is there is a tab on the employee record, which I'm going to break in here momentarily to show you, that will control that default task that's always applied for the employees. And I kind of segue here because typically the question always becomes is, how does an employee get that task assigned to the employees to their time card when they don't even clock into a task? Well, the key thing here to keep in mind is it automatically defaults there because of this default task setting that's on the employee profile. Now, otherwise, the system is actually going to pull whatever task they select. So in some cases around the country, the Walter devices, the time clocks, we do have the employees being prompted for a task. In more cases than not, they are not prompting, so the system is always going to take their default task, and I'll show you here momentarily. For phone-in, that's a call-in system. When you use a phone system, the last prompt that is asked of the employee is to pick your task, or I believe choose one for your default task. So at that point, the employee can pick a task they're going to actually work at, or just use a default task which relates back to this default task on the employee profile. The mobile punch and the web punch actually have drop downs that actually allow you to pick the task or allow the employee to pick the task they want to use. So there it is actually a little bit more fluid for them that they can actually go through and pick the one and control a bit more of what they need to make sure their labor pops under. So real fast, before I leave this task level rate discussion, I'm going to just pause real quick. I'm going to log into Blueforce. And I want to show you this particular screen here, because this screen is actually a list of my employees I have out there, my test employees. So I'm going to go with my first employee off the list called Edward. His name is Edward. And in there, he's got his employee profile. And everyone on this call has access to seeing the employee profile. The one thing I will point out for you is if you have access to the pay rate field on the timesheet, then you also have access to this rates and compensation tab that is right here on the screen. Let me change my color there. There we go. Change it to a brighter color. So right here, that rates and compensation tab will tell you the employee's pay rate. It will tell you some other information in here as needed. But bottom line, you will not have access to seeing this, or you will not have access to even see the tab or any of the rates if you do not have access to the pay rate field. But in this section also, there is another nice little tab, and it's called Default Shift and Task. Now the Default Shift and Task tab is going to control a lot for you. That Default Shift and Task actually allows you to see each job the employee can work, but more importantly, it shows you what the default task is for that particular job. So for example, right now, Edward here can only work one job. He only has one job under his listing here. So this one job, which is my main office, is which is my test job here. That is the only job that he can actually clock into. This is also the only job that he can actually record time against. So to that, he has on the fourth column over, there's a column called default task. Default task will show you whatever his default task is when the system does not prompt him for a task. So to that, if I were to clock in right now as Edward and went to clock job 100, which is my main office, punched in, the system is probably not gonna ask me for a task, so it's only gonna assume that I'm a custodian. So the question always comes up, like I mentioned earlier, if I look at the time card screen, there's all these tasks out there. Why is Edward, in this case, always popping up as a custodian when he's really a window washer or window cleaner? Well, the problem is because he's been loaded in the system with the incorrect task. So to that, this is actually a tab that for another webinar down the road, and I've covered this in prior webinars in the past, but this whole little area down here can be edited by the little edit link on the far left-hand side of the column. So if you ever see a task that's incorrect on an employee's default, you can always go in there and edit it. However, I caution you before you do this. Since I mentioned earlier in the call that J.D. Edwards is a system of record, guess what? Where is the information coming from? It's J.D. Edwards. So I would first make sure that the position, the title, and even there's an override task field on the J.D. Edwards Employee Details tab on the employee profile in J.D. Edwards that can actually be corrected there. And then the system will send down that change automatically within the next 30 minutes. That's a system record. That's where we want to actually make those changes, because if we were to ever do a full push down of the employee information back to Blueforce, it's going to override what we just changed. So it's always good to start over on the J.D. Edwards side. So for all those on this phone call here who do deal with employee profiles and employee information in J.D. Edwards, if you go to the Employee Details tab in JDE, there is a override task field there that you can actually go in there and override any task that's been currently assigned within J.D. Edwards to send to Blueforce. So you have the ability to override that there. And I believe there is some documents or some pictures, some screenshots that we have that can help you with that information if you need some assistance with that. So that is kind of the default shift and task, and I'll come back to the screen momentarily. The other one is, the other option of stop making rate changes is to do a shift differential payroll. Now it's called a shift differential. I think in the system it's also referred to as a pay differential. But bottom line, what's happening here is the employee can be set up to get paid based on a certain condition or situation that occurs when they work a particular task, a particular rate type, a particular time frame, day of the week, or shift. With that being said, is if you have a rule that says when an employee works as a window cleaner, let's say, we automatically want to bump them up by $2 an hour. In that case, we can set that rule in the system. When the system records any information regarding an employee working on job 1, 2, 3 and working as a window cleaner, the system will automatically go in there and apply that $2 additional rate or whatever it may be to the employee's pay rate, therefore allowing you to not have to intervene and allowing you just to go and look at the timesheet and say, oh, look, it actually paid them correctly. So the shift differential can be applied at different levels. Like I said, the task, which basically means they work a specific task, specific rate type. Maybe you want to say that anytime someone, I don't know, anytime someone works holiday works, you automatically want to pay them an extra $5 an hour. Or anytime someone goes in there and I'm going to use the Denver International Airport as an example. They have snow pay. So we can also go in there and say whenever snow pay is used, automatically increment that employee a certain amount of money. So there's different ways we can do that. All the system does, it takes the initial employee pay rate, adds the condition that is given, whether it be a dollar amount or percentage of the pay rate, and increments that to their hours. So the system will do all this work for you, and it'll actually note the change on the employee timesheet. Now, a benefit of having access to the pay rate is you actually see this amount and the actual pay rate, all that good stuff, on the actual timesheet. So from that perspective, you can actually review it and kind of keep tabs of it occurring or not. Now, obviously, if you don't have access to the pay rate, you're kind of left in the dark. You don't know. You all you see is the hours. You don't know if they actually got applied in the background. That's why it gets important as a submitter and approver that you're actually taking that time to review those dollar rates and as well as part of your, your weekly process to go in and close out your payrolls. So this can also happen on a time frame. So what that also means is the employee can work, for example, maybe you have a rule that says if the employee works from 4 p.m. to midnight, they get $2 in pay additional because they're working the night shift. So we can have that set up in the system because maybe the employee works during the day sometimes, works on the night another time. The system will automatically get this going for you. Now, all these different examples, I'll go into more detail like day of the week and shift a little bit. I'll actually go into the Blueforce module and show you this. In both cases, here, the task level and in the shift differential payroll level, they're both set up at the job level in Blueforce. This is not an employee-by-employee basis. This is actually at the job level. So we take the task at the job and apply those tasks, those rates to them. Then we actually go into the shift differentials and go to create shift differentials or payrolls on the actual job record as well. So in either case, and whenever you see either one of these and you're interested in doing this, in either case, these have to be done correctly. So for the task level changes, you don't have access to, no one on the call here has access to go in there and do those yourself. The shift differential rules, you do have access, but they can be a little confusing or complex the first time you go and try to do this on your own. So in both cases, we ask you to solicit the IT team, whether it be myself, Tiandra, Beth, or Jade, to actually assist you with this this setup, because it can be very beneficial to you if you do it right the first time. But the system is actually, once you get in there and use it, we'll turn it over and let you control it going forward. So let's go back real quick. I'm going to talk a little bit more about task level rates. And the task level rates, once again, are the rates you can set up at a task level, meaning that an employee can actually work a certain job and get paid based on that task. So that being said, in the system, we do have a little area where we can go and see each job, and the job is reflected on this particular screenshot at the very top of the screen. It'll show you the job information right here. And it'll tell you that for that job, these are all the different tasks that are available for that job. What makes them valid or not are the little green dots versus the little red dots on the right-hand side of this screen. Well, that basically says if it's a green dot when we go in there, that means that's an active task that JD Edwards sent over to this job in Blueforce. Now, we all understand this is a topic made for another time, but for everyone on this phone call, it's a benefit to discuss this now. But sometimes you'll go in and notice that the job that one of your jobs may have too many tasks. You may have tasks that you don't even use. And to that, that's a conversation I'd like you to have as well with one of us here at the IT ePay team, because you may have 20 tasks available for a job, but in reality, you may only use 3 on a daily basis. The employees may only clock in as a custodian. They may only clock in as a supervisor. They may only clock in as a carpet tech, and that might be all you use. To that, we can actually, from the ePay side, we can actually go in there and unassign or basically turn off or deactivate those tasks for use. So that means is it's less selection that the employees have to listen on a phone-in system or see on a clock or on the mobile punch, etc. But it kind of cleans up the process for us as well. So we can have that conversation offline in a whole different topic, one-on-one discussion there. But if you ever see too many tasks on a job, let us know. We can assist you with that. But the way this actually works is a task level rate here. If the actual employee comes in, normally is defaulted as a custodian. We can actually set up a rule that says, whenever they clock in as a custodian, we're going to leave them alone. We're not going to actually go in there and apply any additional rate. Whatever they get paid is their normal pay rate, is what the system's going to generate for them as their pay. However, we can say that whenever someone is a floor tech, which is down below, we want them to get paid but we want to get them paid at a different rate. For example, $12 an hour. So what I would do is go into floor tech, find it in the system, and set it up as a $12 rate. Now, same thing, some of you may see on your task list, you may have an option for cleaning other. And I'm going to hold cleaning other as an option that we can use as kind of an offshoot. Because sometimes an employee may clock in as a custodian. You may have others clocking in as a floor tech. You may have others clocking in as an elevator starter. may have others clocking in as engineers, and all these different tasks are actually being used. They're valid all the way across the board. We have one that's kind of a flex one that some employees inadvertently got assigned to, but nevertheless, there's one out there called cleaning other. And we can assign cleaning other as a kind of an alternative rate task out there if we need to, where we can assign that as being your special scenario for an employee. So the way this actually works, let me clear my drawings off the screen here. So right here, there's the task level rate. So example is I would open up the carpet tech task and go in there to the actual rate. Now, by default, the regular rate that's listed here is blank. There's no pay rate in here. What that tells the system and tells anybody is that the system is not going to use, since it's a blank rate, it automatically take the employee's default pay rate. If there is a rate here, in case this case has $10 an hour, the carpet tech rate now gets assigned $10 an hour whenever someone uses it. So kind of give you a scenario here. I may be working at as a custodian at $9.50, but tonight you would move me over to a carpet tech role or a carpet tech task. And when I clock in as a carpet tech, or I have my time card edited to a task of carpet tech, at that point I automatically get $10 an hour. And the system automatically knows this. The system automatically pays out correctly. It automatically assigns that $10 rate for you. Now, this task comes kind of step back a little bit. This task starts out in JD Edwards. It comes as part of the job setup. So one of the key steps for those on the phone call that may be doing some job setups, we also tell the system at that point in time, what task model is assigned to this particular job. Is this a job a cleaning job? Is it a facility, an IFS job? Is it a security job? What kind of job is it? From that assignment, the system then sends the appropriate tasks over to Blueforce. Now in Blueforce, then, like I said, you can see a list of 2 tasks. You can see a list of 20 tasks, just depending on what task model was used. Now, obviously, if it was set up incorrectly initially, you're going to see the wrong task here, and then it may not make sense when you see the tasks that are available. But bottom line, it starts in JD Edwards. Now, once we come in here, then we can come in here and assign these task level rates and whatnot. Now, these rates, as I'm talking about, these task level rates are set up by job. So one of the questions that I see that we've gotten is just about asking about the job numbers. Can be set up by job? And yes, this is how they're set up. They're always by job. They're never by employee. So essentially, what's going to happen is you go into the job record. We go and pull up the job. Then we go in there and look at all the tasks that are available. If you only have one task, then it makes it very simple for us to do this. We go into that task. We open it up, get to this screen, and we assign that appropriate rate for that task at this level. Now, like I mentioned, just to reiterate, when the employee works this specific task for this specific job, the employee will get paid accordingly based on whatever we have set up in the system. The only caveat to this is you have to remember that we have a task rate set up. So, for example, if we have any union increases or we have any minimum wage rules that's changed, like, in the beginning of the year we had a lot of states that changed their minimum wage rules. Stuff like that. Once we hard code something in the system like this, the system will continue to pay this employee, in this case, $10 an hour for carpet tech, unless we tell it otherwise. So we have to come back here and remember that we have to adjust that, at the end of the year when we raise this to $10.25 an hour or whatever it may be. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have the option of the cleaning other or the other task that might be used. And I think everyone has the other task available. I think it's called engineering other, cleaning other, guard other. There's a couple different ones out there. But these that are available are kind of a catch-all task that can be used for your benefit. What I mean by that is you can actually now, like I said, if you have someone using carpet tech or you have someone using custodian, you have those people consistently clocking in and out on a daily basis to those tasks, we can use another unassigned task or a task that's, in this case, other, as being your catch-all. So you can actually go in here and assign a special rate to it and use it as needed if you need to. So it's kind of a floating or extra task that's set up in there for us. Now that's the task rules, and those, like I said, I'm going to stop right there real fast. I want to actually show you in Blueforce, just to reiterate, where we can go and see all that. So once again, as I mentioned earlier, the employee profile has its default shift and task. So this is the default that I was talking about that's going to automatically assign to the employee in most cases. Okay. Now when we're actually going in there and talking about the task level stuff, that is not set up at the employee level. That is set up here at the job level. So the job level is where you would actually see the task options. So I can go in here, and this is just an example, but this is where I would actually go in there to see all my tasks for my specific job that I have currently selected. In this case, I can go in here and see these are all the tasks that are available. Keep in mind the ones with the green dots are the ones that are currently active and visible by the employee. So at this point, I can go through and adjust these particular tasks as needed. And once again, it's very simple. From an IT perspective, the ePay team here would actually go in here, click on Edit on the particular task you need adjusted. And once they click on Edit, the system will actually pop up the little screen that actually will allow you to now assign that particular rate. So in this case, we go in there, put in whatever amount we want, and once we hit Save, it's now active. So whenever the employee starts working that particular task going forward, it automatically would adjust that rate appropriately. Now, once again, it's noted in a different color for those that have access to the pay rate. Any pay rate changes are always noted. I believe it's in a green color, just so you know that there was a change in the rate. It doesn't count against you in this case if the system is generating. It's only going to count against you from a rate change perspective if you yourself go in there and edit that rate. It's very simple, very quick, and we're done. I mean, that's how quick we can get that set up for you guys. Now, going back to the little presentation slide, the next topic is the shift differential rule. Now, this is the one that's a little bit more popular. I personally like this way, but this works the best when you have employees that have certain scenarios when they actually need to work certain tasks and in turn to get paid certain rates. What that basically means is, for example, here, if I go to the job record, everyone has access to seeing this, and that's a tab called Pay Differential. When I go to the Pay Differential tab there, I have the ability now to go in and set up the rules based on different items. Like I said, specific tasks worked. What that basically means, in my first example up here in the top left, if the employee works as a floor tech, then something's going to happen. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So in this job, I have one rule that says if he's a floor tech, then do this. If he's not a floor tech, then leave it alone, pay him the normal rate, or normal circumstances are in effect. Down below, I have specific rate type. Maybe, for example, like this was an example from the Denver International Airport as well. They have a rate type called high time. What it basically means is when employees work this specific rate type, then do something. Or maybe we want a rule in there that says when someone works overtime, and that's the rate type that's assigned at that time, then do something. So we have things we can do based on rate type as well. Like I said earlier, based on a time range, top right there. So if the employee works within that time frame during that day, then it automatically will, in this case, I have the rule example saying it's going to pay them overtime, and it's also going to tack on an additional 2 hours. So we can actually, $2 an hour, I'm sorry. So there's a couple things we can do on that perspective as well. Now, one thing I don't show in here is the percentage, but right here, there's a dollar sign to the right of the rule for time range. That can be toggled to a percentage as well. So in parts of the country, we have a rule that says if they work between a certain time frame, they get 10% of their pay rate, additional. So if someone's getting, $10 an hour, that basically equates to an extra $1 an hour. But we can do percentages or dollar ranges from that perspective. And lastly, we can do a specific day of the week or shift, and we have settings in there where we can go in here and say they work on Tuesday, they work on Wednesday, they work on Thursday, they work on Friday, and that's the only days that this rule is applied. So Saturday, Sunday, and Monday do not get touched in this scenario. Or I can say only employees working a certain shift are affected. Now, I'm going to pause here because this default shift that's shown on here, that shift is actually the same thing as I showed you earlier. Oh, let me clear my drawings on the screen. That I showed you earlier on the actual employee record. So if you go back to the employee record again, and go back into Edward's record real quick, down at the bottom you go to that default shift and task tab one more time. You notice we talked about the default task, but you also have a default shift. Now that default shift, like I tell everyone, is nothing more than a label. Doesn't mean that the employee always works that time frame. It's just basically a label. So we can say this person's part of the day shift, or this person's part of the night shift, this person's part of the overnight shift, or they're part of this shift has lunches, or this doesn't have lunches. It's just a label. So right now this label is 000 to 2359. That's the label that we've assigned as a shift. And you'll find that many of your jobs have this shift as a default shift that's out there. It's nothing more, nothing less. Nothing, just a label. So we can actually group employees based on shifts. We can say, the day shift is here. The day shift in turn then has a certain rule that gets applied, and shift B has a different rule, and shift C has a different rule, and so forth. That's the purpose of the default shift. This is just saying that if the employee typically will work this particular label or is associated to this particular label some way, shape, form, and other things can occur off of that. So we can run shift differential rules off the default shift. We can run lunch rules. That's the big one off of default shift. There's a lot of things we can do off of that default label. So just keep that in mind. I call it a label, nothing more, nothing less. And sorry for that little tangent. I just want to address that because that's a big part of this conversation when we talk about shift differentials. So you can see down here at the bottom right that there's different shifts that were available for this job example. And you notice a lot of them look very similar. But if I only check this particular shift off the list, that means that those employees that have that label on their employee default shift and task tab are the only ones that are going to get applied to this particular rule. So that becomes important to understand that. Or I can go through here and say I want all of them and check them all off the list, and that takes care of that problem real quick. It takes care of everyone that's working and meeting that criteria. So this is a shift differential. I'm actually going to go into Blueforce here momentarily so you can actually see it live and me create one real quick. But this is how it looks. So essentially we go in there first, and I'll just do some little marks on the screen here. We're going to go in here first and we're going to name it. So we're going to name the rule whatever we want to call it. We then go in there and basically make sure it's the right job that we want. We go in there and set up the rule for task. What that essentially means in this case, in this example, is any task. What that says is right now if I were to do a rule that revolves around payment or a pay rate, and I set this up, if it says for any task, that means it doesn't matter if they clock in as custodian, doesn't matter if they clock in as a guard, doesn't matter if they clock in as an engineer. If they clock into this particular job, they're going to be eligible for this rule. Because there's other components down below that are going to trigger it off, but right now that means for any task. It doesn't mean the system's looking at everybody clocking in and clocking out. Next, we say for rate type. Do we want to do all rate types, or is it only a specific rate type that they're working? In this case, this is set up for this high time Windows rate type. So we can actually say, it's only for regular rate type. That means that typically anybody clocking in and out of the system is going to be affected. Or we can be very specific and pick a specific rate type. We then go in there and determine what date range, what time frame of the day is going to work. Is it going to be for all day, or is it only going to be for a select segment of the day? And then if it's only for that scenario, we want to tell the system what to do. In this case, we're adding $2 an hour for anybody working between 4 and 11. And then last, like I mentioned earlier, we pick the days of the week that this rule is going to run. This is only going to be in effect on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we tell it what label or what shift those employees are working with. So it's not difficult. It's just there's a lot of noise or a lot of things going on this particular screen that kind of makes it hard to decipher. But if you follow it down step by step, it's very simple. The key thing to keep in mind, and the reason why I ask everyone wanting a pay differential rule to be applied, or some type of payroll like this, is that the first time we go through this, it's good instruction to actually get the ITE pay team to assist you here, because what's going to happen is that it becomes live immediately. Once you go in here and save it, it's active based on the flag up here at the top of the screen, and then we go on and starts running. So any time that's out there, any time going forward, automatically gets applied. So that becomes very important to pay attention. If at any point we set one up and you don't want to run it anymore, then we just come in here and turn it off. The flag says is active. Just turn it off, and the rule stays there, but it's no longer running. So that saves you some headache and trouble from having to set that up again later or anything if you ever needed to. So as I mentioned, I do have a slide here. I just didn't want to wait to discuss it, but the default shift and task tab on the employee profile, as I mentioned, is down below, and the default shift and the actual task can be big parts of that particular setup of the pay differential. All right, so real quick, I just want to show you that screen where it is in the Blueforce. So once again, I'm on the employee record here, but what I tell everyone is start at the top of the screen, go to the job record, or what you can do is from the home screen of when you log in, just click on job in the middle of the screen. You'll see job right here in the middle. When I click on job, I then will be prompted obviously to pick a job that I want to work with. In this case, I'm picking a little select test group that I have. And then once I go in to that test group where I already have it selected, I can actually pick that job. If it's, in this case, it's a group, that's why it keeps referring me back here. But you'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, you do have access to those jobs already selected. At that point, pick the job you want to work with. In this case, I want to work with this first job called My Main Office, at which point the system will open up My Main Office, and I can actually go into this tab down at the very bottom right of the screen, and this tab is called Pay Differential. Now, it's called Pay Differential. Some people call it Shift Differential. Some just call it Payroll. All these different names for it, they all do the same thing. They automatically pay the employee correctly based on a scenario or a condition that's met. So from that perspective, I can now go into this, and there's another way of setting up pay differentials. I just like driving this direction because you're in the job record. Some of you may have access to the scheduling module. There's a way of setting this up through that scheduling piece there. There's a function there called manage. I think it was called offhand, but there's a function in there. You can actually do all this stuff off that direction as well. But we're going to focus this way for this webinar. But once you go to pay differential, you can see all the pay differentials that are set up in the system. Right now I have one called test, to which now I can now go and edit it and make adjustments to that rule or create a new one by just hitting add row at the bottom of that previous window. But bottom line, once again, for this rule, I have it set that if anyone works this particular job, which is My Main Office, works any task or any rate type, but if they work between 8 a.m. and 12 noon, they're going to get an additional $1 per hour. So this basically says anybody who clocks in between 8 to 12, the system automatically increments them $1. Now, if they are already on the clock during that time, for example, if I were an employee at this job and I actually clocked in at 6 a.m. and I worked till 4 p.m., that's a 10-hour shift. But since I was on the clock and I was working between 8 and 12, the system will automatically take those 4 hours, apply them on a different timesheet line for you, so you could have them visible, a little, kind of segregated there on a different line. But that 4 hour would actually show that additional $1 per hour for you. So from a timesheet perspective, it does show you that. It's like it kind of splits those out on a separate line for you, so you can quickly review and see, oh yeah, the employee did get paid correctly. So that's just a quick introduction to the shift differential rule. But once again, task level rates, those are at the job level as well, and those are automatically set for the kind of hard-coded pay rate. The pay differential is a little bit more fluid in that you can actually tell the system the condition and in what increment pay rate would be used. Now there is a plus and there's also a minus and an equals. So for example, if someone works 8 to 12 and you needed to subtract $1 per hour, you could. That's not really a popular one. We really haven't, I think we used it one time in my whole time of doing ePay here, so that's an option. Or we can also say just equals. So that means that they work between that time, they just gain a flat equal amount, whatever it may be. So there are conditions you can do. There's secondary rules you can set up, but bottom line, this is probably the way to go to help you with those pay rate changes. So bottom line, I would say going forward, just please, no more rate changes. Make sure that you're actually following the kind of the proper policy and protocol going through and making sure that the employee pay rate is correct on JDE, But more secondarily, if you need any rules or adjustments like this, we can apply them at the task level or at the shift differential level as needed. So kind of wrapping up, I want to say thank you for joining us, but I want to also just tell you that as options for support and going and assisting you with this setup, always go through the IT support line, go through and put a help desk ticket or call the help desk number. We obviously do this because we want to track what kind of issues we're having coming through, but more important, we don't want an email or a voicemail waiting in someone's mailbox all day waiting to be addressed, and that person is not readily available. So please use the help desk at all times. Now, thank you again for joining us today. Next week's session, we'll be talking about alerts, and alerts is another part that'll help you with your compliance. So as we go through that, next Tuesday or Thursday at 2 p.m. Central, we'll continue this series. And ongoing, we have a lot of exciting topics that we'll be discussing that'll help you with your compliance scores going forward. But keep in mind, Tuesday and Thursday, join us at 2 p.m. Central. Until we talk again, thank you again for joining us today.